Destiny and Lila Rose recently had a debate about abortion. It was billed as the ultimate abortion debate. But did it live up to its branding? How well did the debaters really do? Did either one win? Let's analyze it together. Rose was arguing the position that abortion should not be legal. We'll start with her opening statement, a statement she begins with an anecdote.
I want to tell you about one of the bravest people that I know, my friend, Liana Robledo. When Liana was just 12 years old, she was taking a walk to a supermarket. She was kidnapped and raped in Mexico City. After a suicide attempt, she was taken to the hospital where she learned that she was 13 weeks pregnant. The doctor urged her to abort, telling her that she shouldn't have to live with the consequences of her rape. But Liana asked him this question that left him speechless. She said, "Will abortion take away the rape? Will the abortion make me feel safe again?"
Rose goes on to describe how Liana ultimately decided to keep the baby and ended up being happy with that decision, graduating from college and starting a nonprofit to help assault and abuse survivors. A few key points about this anecdote. First, one could argue that it's at least somewhat effective rhetorically, since it functions as a sort of counterweight to one of the scenarios often put forth on the pro-choice side, namely the scenario of a young rape victim who does not want to carry her resulting pregnancy to term. However, the anecdote is much less effective philosophically. It's simply not clear how this case sheds any light on the question that the debate is about, namely, should abortion be legal? For instance, Rose points out that Liana asked, as a rhetorical question, will abortion take away the rape? Will the abortion make me feel safe again? But the issue with this, in the context of the present debate, is that no one on the pro-choice side thinks that the value of abortion access in cases of rape is a matter of taking away the rape or helping the victim feel safe. The value is, more plausibly, in helping the victim not have her life profoundly derailed by being forced to have a child she might not want. So Rose's opening statement is off to a bit of a shaky start, philosophically speaking. But let's see if she can turn it around when she goes on to give her core argument.
Here is the core case that I present. It is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. Abortion is the act of intentionally killing an innocent human life. Therefore, abortion is always wrong and must be illegal.
First of all, kudos to Rose for stating her argument so directly, in premise-conclusion form. There's a certain vulnerability that comes with this kind of clarity, and lots of speakers would be too afraid to do it. That said, there are some philosophical missteps in the argument. Let's begin with the first premise. It is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. One issue with this premise is that it's making a more extreme claim than Rose needs to make for her argument. Notice that even people who are sympathetic to her anti-abortion conclusion might be reluctant to accept this premise. I have in mind, in particular, those who believe that active euthanasia can be morally permissible. Active euthanasia, for instance, administering a lethal injection to a terminally ill patient who's in great pain and who sincerely and uncoercedly requests to be euthanized, is an act of intentionally killing an innocent human. But there's a serious case to be made that it is at least sometimes morally permissible. The fact that Rose's first premise in her anti-abortion argument is saddled with a commitment to a highly controversial stance on this separate issue of euthanasia is indeed a weakness. It makes the premise more contentious than it needs to be. A better version of the premise would be something like this. With the possible exception of euthanasia, so not saying it is an exception, just that it could be one, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. While the wording might feel a bit clunkier, this revised premise would have the distinct advantage of not committing her anti-abortion argument to a controversial position on the separate issue of euthanasia. Now, Rose's second premise is abortion is the act of intentionally killing an innocent human life. I don't have much to say about this premise. As a quibble, I might recommend not saying the act and instead saying an act, since the act risks making it sound as if all acts of intentionally killing an innocent human are abortions, which would of course be false. Again, though, this is not a big deal, and I do think it's worth being extra lenient on someone's wording when they're speaking in a live context. Lastly, Rose's conclusion is, therefore, abortion is always wrong and must be illegal. Unfortunately, there's a big problem here. This conclusion does not follow from the premises. The part about abortion always being wrong does, but not the part about how abortion must be illegal. The premises don't say anything about what should be illegal, only about what's morally wrong. And recall that the question Rose and Destiny are debating is not whether abortion is morally wrong, but whether it should be legal. These two questions are importantly distinct, since even if a given action is wrong, it does not follow that that action should be illegal. For example, saying something needlessly rude to someone is wrong, but surely it ought not to be illegal. What's moral and what should be legal or illegal often come apart. On that note, it's actually a little ironic to see Rose's argument conflate moral and legal questions in this way, as Rose herself recognizes later in the debate that not every morally wrong action should be illegal.
I think people have the freedom to do things that, are morally wrong, and not every moral wrong should be illegal.
So what's going on here? Why does Rose's argument seem to fall prey to such a basic confusion? Here's the most charitable interpretation I can think of. What Rose is trying to get at is the thought that abortion involves not just wrongness, but a certain kind of wrongness, namely murder, and that such a kind of wrongness as this indeed ought to be illegal. This reading of her argument is supported not simply by interpretive charity, but also by something that Rose herself says later in the debate.
Moral wrongs that should be illegal have to do with fundamental human rights, like your right to live.
If we view Rose's argument in this light, here's what a cleaned up version of it might look like. Premise 1, killing an innocent human is murder. Premise 2, abortion is killing an innocent human. 3, subconclusion, therefore abortion is murder, from 1 and 2. 4, murder should be illegal. And lastly, the conclusion, 5, therefore abortion should be illegal, from 3 and 4. True, this cleaned up version of the argument is a bit unwieldier to state, but it does have the advantage that the conclusion now actually follows from the premises. All in all then, Rose's opening statement has left a lot of room for criticism, especially in the way she's formulated her core argument. But will Destiny take her to task for this? Destiny's opening statement gets off to a promising start, where he discusses how personhood centers on consciousness, and on how consciousness comes from having a sufficiently developed, functioning brain.
It's plainly obvious that a sufficiently developed brain hosts a uniquely human mind, and this is the thing that makes us who we are, and grants us the same personhood that we recognize in others. It is the thing we cherish most, and is the thing we try to protect when we speak of morality and law.
However, his response soon takes a nosedive as he starts imputing bad motives to his opponent.
In this debate, Lila's going to bounce between a lot of different words in order to try and force your intuitions to stray from where they would be otherwise. She'll casually swap words like child and fetus and embryo and human and person in order to confuse and obscure, but make no mistake, this confusion is not by accident, it's by design.
The problem with this is that even if it's true that Rose is badly motivated or is intentionally obscuring things, that's simply not relevant to the issue under debate, namely whether abortion should be legal. What Rose's own personal motivations might or might not happen to be is one thing. What the evidence supports on the question of whether abortion should be legal is another. Further, I'd say that Destiny's charge against Rose in this part is bad even on a sheer rhetorical level. It makes him come across as petty and accusatory. But the problems for Destiny don't stop there. He soon goes on to claim that Rose is focused overwhelmingly on the embryo's future, and that this ultimately tells against her position.
I will remind the audience as well that the potential of a thing is not the thing itself. The human embryo, were it to have some features that were worth moral protection, would be worth protecting in the present all on its own. Instead, constant allusions will be made to the future of the embryo. If anything, I treat this as an immediate concession that the embryo is indeed without moral value, which is why Lila will need so desperately to invoke the future of the thing to salvage any moral value from it at all.
Here, Destiny is simply not being fair to Rose's position, as by this point she has placed quite a bit of importance on the present features of an embryo, and not just on its future.
In the womb, brainwaves are detectable at just 6 weeks from fertilization. At 9 weeks, the child can suck her thumb, swallow, grasp objects, touch her face, sigh, and stretch. Neuron multiplication is especially rapid around 15 weeks. In this process of rapid development, where exactly do we draw the line to determine some should be protected and some shouldn't? It's impossible.
Rose also holds that the embryo, qua human being, has a rational nature, and not just in its future, but in its present moment.
A preborn child or a newborn child has a rational nature even though they haven't actively developed it yet.
In this light, Destiny's claim that Rose's view centers on the embryo's future as the source of its value is a flat-out straw man. A bit later, Destiny puts forth a different argument against Rose's view.
Lila will argue that a person begins at the instantaneous moment of conception, as though conception were a single moment in time. What is she even defining conception as? Is it the moment the egg recognizes the sperm to permit entry? Is it when the egg no longer permits the entry of any other sperm? Is it when membrane fusion has fully finished? Is it when the first set of chromosomes have made copies of themselves, or is it after they've divided into pairs? Conception is just as much a multi-stage process as pregnancy, and to pretend as though there is one spark at a very precise moment in time that defines the entirety of conception is to scientifically misunderstand and misstate the process.
This argument is not very effective, as it's perfectly open to Rose to concede that there's not a single maximally precise moment where conception takes place. That is, Rose could admit that there's some degree of vagueness as to exactly when conception takes place, such that for a short period of time, we don't or can't know whether conception has taken place, or perhaps even such that it's metaphysically indeterminate whether conception has taken place. This acknowledgement wouldn't pose any clear problem for her view, as it's trivially easy to come up with loads of other cases of vagueness or fuzzy boundaries in ethics that don't seem problematic at all. For example, take the claim that parents have special obligations to their children. This is a claim that will strike many or most people as highly plausible, if not obviously true. Now, imagine that someone tried to argue against this claim by simply saying, you can't pinpoint an exact moment when a child comes into existence. Is it conception? Viability? The moment the parents decide they're keeping the baby? The moment the fetus becomes sentient? The moment the baby is born? This would obviously be a terrible argument. The fact that there's some indeterminacy, whether epistemic or metaphysical, in when a child comes into existence just doesn't seem to pose any threat to the claim that parents have special obligations to their children. And there are countless examples one could give besides this. If appealing to vagueness or fuzzy boundaries is not a good objection in cases like these, it's unclear how it'd be any better as an objection to Rose's position on abortion. Destiny goes on to make a point about Rose's view of DNA.
Lila will argue that unique DNA is what makes us human, but for some reason this doesn't apply to hair or skin or any other cells in the human body. She will say that a zygote with its own DNA can go on to develop to become its own human, but what of identical twins that split from the same zygote to become two? Does Lila consider identical twins two halves of the same soul or mind? Are they each their own person? Did the death of one person give way to two?
Destiny's objection here seems to rest on a rather uncharitable interpretation of Rose's position. Rose's position, when interpreted in a minimally charitable way, is not that what makes someone a human is having DNA distinct from that of any other human. It's that having human DNA at all, that is, any DNA profile that would fit within the range of human as distinct from other species, is sufficient to make one a human being, or to make one a person, or to give one a soul, or however she might prefer to put it. And on this minimally charitable reading of her view, identical twins would each certainly count as human beings, since they each have human DNA. Earlier, I pointed out a moment where Destiny began attacking Rose's motives rather than her position. Unfortunately, near the end of his opening statement, he descends back into ad hominem.
In Scooby-Doo, how is it that a gang of meddling kids and their talking dog always seem to get the best of the monsters they encounter? It's because once the mask is lifted, the monster is not a monster at all. It's simply a person masquerading as such. Lila's arguments against abortion are very much the same. Her worldview is entirely informed by her religion, and the mask of logic is only applied after the fact to sway those who would otherwise be unconvinced by religious arguments.
Just as before, the problem is that Destiny's accusation here is simply not relevant to settling the question that the debate is about. Even if it's true that Rose's religion is what's motivating her to put forth her arguments, it doesn't follow that Rose's conclusion is false, or that the arguments she's putting forth are not good ones. Her arguments, like anyone's, should be evaluated on their own merits. And this isn't even the end of the ad hominem attacks in Destiny's opening statement, as he immediately follows up with this.
Think if abortion were, as Lila would have you believe, the crime of infanticide, of murdering an innocent baby child, one would imagine she would be compelling us to do everything within our power to limit the amount of abortions that happen. And yet Lila is a relentless advocate for the very same behaviors that tend to produce the most amount of unwanted pregnancy. Lila believes in abstinence-only education, claims that contraception is immoral, and thinks that even forms of sex outside of penis and vagina intercourse are immoral as well.
The problem here is no different from before. Even if it's true that Rose herself adopts some positions that are in tension with her anti-abortion stance, or that make her vulnerable to a charge of hypocrisy, that has no bearing on the question of whether abortion should be legal. With all these problems in mind, Destiny's opening statement is honestly quite disappointing. Remember that Rose's opening statement left him some easy places he could have attacked. Most importantly, the fact that the conclusion of her central argument did not even follow from the premises. But rather than call out that glaring mistake, Destiny primarily made weak arguments of his own, uncharitably interpreted or outright strawmanned Rose's view, and attacked her motives. Indeed, it wouldn't be much of an exaggeration to say that Destiny's opening statement is, in its own way, a crash course on things not to do in a debate. So Destiny has left Rose with lots of mistakes she could very easily call him out on. But does she? For her part, Rose does go on to respond to Destiny's claim that her view is motivated solely by her religion.
Destiny also says that my position is completely based on religion. You heard my opening remarks. That is not correct. I can absolutely make a pro-life argument from religion, multiple different world religions actually, but my position was argued from a foundational principle that our country was founded on, which is that we have a right to life and we should be given equal protection under the law based on the 14th Amendment.
This response is not bad as far as it goes, though I believe it'd have been even better if Rose had also pointed out that Destiny's accusations about her motives were not even relevant to the question under debate in the first place. In her response, Rose also brings up a new case that she feels puts pressure on Destiny's view.
I want to present as an example the case of Jax. Jax is a young boy who died at age 5. He was born with severe anencephaly, so he was not able to have most of the conscious experience that any other person in this room may enjoy. And Jax was missing pretty much all of his brain. He had his brain stem still intact. By Destiny's argument, Jax would be less of a person, less status of a person because he is missing most of his brain.
Rose puts this point as if it's a reductio ad absurdum of Destiny's view. However, to those who agree with Destiny's view, the claim that Jax is less of a person than someone with a brain, and with the consciousness that a brain enables, is probably not going to seem that counterintuitive. Indeed, it's a claim that they're likely to find straightforwardly plausible, rather than some kind of cost for their view. So I'd say that this point or case that Rose is pushing here is just not dialectically all that effective. Destiny, meanwhile, goes on to respond to some of Rose's claims from earlier in the debate. One such claim was that Destiny's view licenses treating different groups of people differently in terms of who lives and who dies.
Today, abortion advocates say that unborn children are not persons, so they can be aborted at will. But every atrocity historically has begun with that lie. They're not one of us. This group of people is not one of us, and therefore it can be justified to kill them.
To this, Destiny responds with the following.
When we look at people who are in permanent vegetative states that are never coming back, when they've been kept on life support for some amount of time and we see that there's no more brain activity, we do terminate the vital functions of those people.
While I'd say that Destiny could have developed this example slightly more, it raises an important point, namely that we often or typically do take a permanent cessation of consciousness to make a life no longer worth continuing. Cutting off the life support of someone who's in a permanent vegetative state is a defensible decision. At least much more defensible than most cases of killing someone who has consciousness. And this, in turn, puts some pressure on us to think that what matters is not having a human body or human DNA, or even having a living human body, but consciousness. Now, earlier in the debate, Rose challenged Destiny's view on the importance of consciousness.
Imagine that you're sound asleep, not even dreaming. Someone comes into the room and kills you with some painless gas poison in the air that kills you in your sleep. You have no awareness of this happening. You've just drifted from sleep to death. Is that okay? You're not conscious. Of course not. It's first-degree murder. Life and murder aren't defined by someone's present capacity for consciousness or conscious experience.
Here's how Destiny responds.
When we look at things like this common argument that gets brought up is that, like, well, what about if a person is sleeping? What about if a person is, they get knocked out on playing kickball too much or something? And the idea that these people have somehow temporarily lost their humanity, in my view, there's a person to speak of there when we talk about who might be unconscious. I can't speak of a person when I talk about a fetus as being unconscious. It's not conscious. It doesn't even have the capacity to become conscious. If a friend were to take me to a McDonald's and we were to go outside and it was just a bunch of construction materials and he said, oh, sorry, it's McDonald's, but it's not going to be here for 9 months, I would say, this is not a McDonald's, bro. It's not even here yet. If a friend were to take me to a McDonald's just closed 30 minutes ago and he said, hey, this is McDonald's, I promise, but it closed 30 minutes ago, I can see that it's there. It's just not currently performing the function that I would hope from a McDonald's because it's currently closed. The same way that a sleeping person is not the same as a person who isn't even born or created yet. It's just a sleeping person who can redeploy that conscious experience at any point in time and who has a meaningful experience that we can speak about that would have asserted some preference while it was existing as a thinking mind, which a fetus has never done.
I'd say this is a fairly effective response. Arguably, the distinction between, on one hand, an existing person who's temporarily lost consciousness, and on the other hand, an entity that has never had consciousness in the first place, is an ethically important distinction. A further strong moment Destiny has in this part of the debate is when he replies to Rose's opening anecdote, and particularly to the rhetorical question of whether abortion in cases of rape could ever take away the rape.
Sometimes this argument about abortion and rape comes up when it has to do with underage people or really any person. And I hear this weird argument floated that the reason why you shouldn't have an abortion if you've been raped is because an abortion won't heal the first rape. I truly don't understand this argument. When I go to the doctor to heal a wound, I'm not looking for them to get rid of the pain of the initial wound. I'm hoping that I don't have to endure additional infection or other complications related to said wound. If a person is raped and as a result of that rape, they are now pregnant, when you're having an abortion, you're not looking to undo the conception. You're looking to undo the following 7, 8, 9 months of having to carry a child that you never even wanted in your body in the first place.
As I touched on earlier, no one who thinks abortion should be legal believes that the value of abortion in cases of rape lies in undoing the rape, which makes it unclear what role that whole part of Rose's opening anecdote is supposed to be playing in the debate. And I think that Destiny's analogy of going to the doctor is a helpful way of highlighting this. Overall then, Destiny is doing a much better job here in his responses to Rose's arguments than he did in his opening statement. The next part of the debate is a less structured discussion, one wherein the debaters get to grill each other with questions and immediately hear their opponent's response. Here's one exchange from this part of the debate.
Should women who have a high chance of miscarriage be banned from trying to conceive?
No.
So even if it was 50% chance of miscarriage, is there any other world where we would accept 2 adults engaging in a behavior that killed a child half the time it happened?
Here Destiny has put forth an interesting challenge to Rose's view. If indeed it's true, as Rose holds, that every miscarriage is morally as serious as the accidental death of an already born, fully functioning human, then why shouldn't women with a high chance of miscarriage be banned from conceiving? Is there any other behavior where we'd accept such a high chance of causing a child's death? As we've just seen, Rose responds to Destiny's question in the negative. She thinks that even women with a high chance of miscarriage should not be banned from conceiving. Let's hear what she says about why.
For the same reason that I don't think that we should ban people, it's Margaret Sanger as an example, right, the founder of Planned Parenthood, her argument was that we should not permit those that were less fit to breed, to have children. And she actually wanted a 2-child policy. She wanted to sterilize. She actually proposed, and she actually was successful in having forced sterilizations of those that she saw as mentally unfit. Just because someone may die, they're sick, because someone might have perceived lower IQ than someone else, that doesn't
here we're
mean
talking
that
about
they shouldn't live and have a right to be protected the same way that anybody else does.
The problem with this response is that it's simply a red herring. Destiny's question didn't have anything to do with the parents or the child's intelligence. The point was simply about cases of high risk of miscarriage, a point he goes on to emphasize.
Sure. So I guess what I'm asking, I'm not necessarily asking from the perspective of the child, although kind of, in the child being unfit. I'm just saying that if there's some reason why 50% of the time the mother were to miscarriage, and that could be known ahead of time, are they not killing half the time, every time they attempt to conceive some new life?
Do you see the moral? There's a very profound moral distinction between a natural death, a death that is caused naturally, it's not intended and directly caused by another human person, and then a death that is directly caused and intended by another human person. One is a murder and one is a tragedy. In life, people die. We will all die, whether we are miscarried before we were even born, or we die at age 10 or age 20, or we hopefully live to be 100 years old. But the fact that you will die, whether very young or very old, doesn't change your humanity or your parents' right to, in love, conceive you and bring you into the world forever, however long or short that may be.
Rose's response here is better than her previous attempt, though it still arguably has problems. While the distinction between intentional and unintentional killing is no doubt an important one in many contexts, it's unclear how it's going to help Rose get out of Destiny's challenge in particular. As an example, suppose that a mother takes her child out to go play in traffic with her on a highway that involves a 50% chance of being killed by passing trucks. And that the mother does this not because she wants the child to be killed, but simply because she thinks it would be a fun time. And yet, alas, as a result of this reckless play, a motorist does unintentionally hit and kill the child. Even though the mother in this case does not intend the child's death, taking the child out to play in traffic is horrendously immoral and an act of extreme negligence, to such an extent that it ought to be, and is, illegal. What Rose needs to explain is why it shouldn't be considered a similarly outrageous act of negligence for women with a high chance of miscarriage to conceive. Now, to say something on Rose's behalf, here's a better response that I believe she could have offered. In the case where there's a 50-50 chance of miscarriage, it's true, on her view, that conceiving creates a 50% chance of a horrible tragedy, a tragedy of equal seriousness to the death of an adult human. However, there's no less a chance of producing an equally good outcome, namely, a kid gets to come into existence and grow up into a fully functioning person. And without the conception, and the risk that it entailed, this kid would never have even gotten to come into existence. So perhaps the prospect of goods and bads here balance out in the end. That said, the hypothetical there involved a 50-50 chance of miscarriage. It's less clear that Rose could use this kind of response if the hypothetical chance of miscarriage were higher, such as 90 or 95%. In cases like that, perhaps the most plausible response from her would be to simply bite the bullet and say that such women should be banned from conceiving. Destiny goes on to press this objection a final time.
But there's no other circumstance you can think of where somebody could engage in a behavior that is so reckless that they know that there's a 50% chance of their child dying should they engage in that behavior, right?
Well, you could say that you could use that line of argumentation, Destiny, to say that people that have severe genetic health issues, or they're a carrier for a severe disability that's life-limiting or threatening, right? They shouldn't be allowed to have children because, and this was the argument of Margaret Sanger, right? You know, an eugenicist, that if you are a carrier for some genetic abnormality that could lead to the death of a future child, you know, short-lived life, or they have a severe disability, somehow they should not be able to conceive and procreate. And I would say, no, every life has value and should have legal protection regardless of how long they live, how developed they are or not developed, or how dependent they are or not dependent.
Rose's response here seems to reduce to the claim that if she conceded Destiny's point, it carries certain implications of or associations with eugenics, which she finds unpalatable. But this simply does nothing to engage with the challenge. Indeed, one way of putting Destiny's challenge is that if Rose's view of abortion is true, it seems to follow that certain eugenic restrictions are in fact justified, at least when it comes to high chances of miscarriage. Here, the most Rose manages to say in response is, essentially, that she doesn't like the idea of eugenic restrictions, or that she doesn't feel that such restrictions are justified. This completely fails to address how her view of abortion arguably puts pressure on us to embrace those same eugenic restrictions that she finds so distasteful. Now, in a later moment, Rose presses Destiny about the Baby Jax case.
So we both talked about Baby Jax. Do you think that because, and you said he doesn't have consciousness, you haven't went as far to indicate that in your speech, do you think that because Baby Jax is missing most of his brain and doesn't have consciousness, in your view, he should not have a right to live?
A right now, if the parents want to have that child and have that experience.
Does he have a right? If the parents wanted to execute him, do they have the right to do that?
Yeah, I think they could have terminated that pregnancy at any point in time, yes.
But as a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, does Baby Jax have the right to live, or can he be executed?
I think you can make the argument that if already committed to having it, they can't change their mind at that point.
Why?
But
Why? He doesn't have consciousness.
Here, Destiny is the one who slips up. In my view, his response would have been much more plausible if he just bit the bullet. After all, if Baby Jax really does permanently lack consciousness, it's not clear what moral issue there'd be, on Destiny's view, with killing him. For instance, the killing couldn't cause any suffering to Jax, couldn't interfere with any of Jax's future plans, and couldn't, according to Destiny's view, violate his rights, as Jax lacks any consciousness. Also, even if it's true that by carrying the pregnancy to term, Jax's parents have committed to raising him, it's unclear what moral significance this has, as people can change their minds about all kinds of things, even things they've committed to, provided that they don't violate anyone's rights in the process. For example, someone might have committed to forge a career in law, but then find out that she's more suited to theater, and pivot to that. Surely there wouldn't be anything morally wrong with such a choice. So why does Destiny not take this option? My best guess is that he's afraid that biting the bullet in this way would be rhetorically bad. In particular, that it'd make him look harsh and uncaring. But I believe that that risk could be largely averted. For instance, he might point out that just as he himself would cease to exist if his consciousness ceased, even were his body to continue living, there is, in Jax's case, no actual person there, just a body. That we use the name Baby Jax, that the baby is cute, and so on, can trigger our emotions, which can cloud our judgment about cases like this. But once we fully grasp that there is no person there, just a body, it starts to seem more intuitive that there's no rights violation involved in killing the body. Of course, there was plenty more to this debate, but for now, suffice it to say, despite the branding of this as the ultimate abortion debate, I don't believe that either of the debaters performed all that well. Destiny's opening statement was especially shoddy, though he did do better later in the debate. Rose, meanwhile, had a more consistent performance, but consistent mostly in that there were problems with her arguments throughout. Ultimately, I don't feel that the debate had a clear winner. Nevertheless, it's precisely by examining the areas where debates, including this one, could have gone better that I believe we can become better debaters and reasoners ourselves. If you found value in this video, you might also like my other debate analysis video, where I examine the format of the show Surrounded. Also, are there any debates that you might be interested in seeing me analyze on this channel? If so, let me know in the comments.